AnxietyCenter.com podcasts, where we talk about everything anxiety, as well as other medical, mental, behavioral, parenting, and nutritional health topics. Thank you for joining us. We hope you find today's podcast interesting and inspiring. Here are your hosts, Jim and Marilyn Folk.
Hi, my name is Jim Folk.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Folk. We are the founders of AnxietyCenter.com.
We welcome you to episode number 2 of AnxietyCenter.com podcasts. We thank you for joining us again today as we talk about all things anxiety, as well as other medical, mental, behavioral, parenting, relationship, and nutritional health topics.
Just to recap, in our first episode, we talked about what anxiety is. We said that anxiety isn't caused by a biological problem with the brain, nor is it a chemical imbalance in the brain. It's not a faulty brain, and it certainly is not caused by our genes. Yep. We said that behaving in an apprehensive manner, such as worry, causes the physiological, psychological, and emotional state of being anxious.
Yep, you bet. But for those of us who have struggled with serious anxiety, we know that behaving in an apprehensive manner can make us feel very sick and can cause great disability and hardship.
Mm-hmm. Jim, we often hear people say, if anxiety is just in your mind, why can it make you feel so awful?
Yeah, no kidding. Well, that's because behavior can cause physiological, psychological, and emotional consequences. Mm-hmm. So there are good reasons why the body can feel so poorly when we behave in an overly apprehensive manner. Mm-hmm. And here's why. Behaving in an apprehensive manner, which is imagining that a person, event, or situation can cause us harm, causes the body to activate the stress response, also known as the emergency response and the fight or flight response. The stress response secretes stress hormones into the bloodstream where they travel to targeted spots in the body to bring about specific physiological, psychological, and emotional changes that enhance the body's ability to deal with danger, either to fight with it or flee from it.
Mm-hmm. Now, we know that the stress response is a vital part of the body's survival mechanism, so it gives us that real boost when we're in dangerous situations and circumstances. And of course, that boost is welcomed if we're being chased by a bear or an alligator.
Yep, you bet, yeah. Or jumping out of an airplane.
Yes. Now, the stress response accomplishes these important changes in the body via stress hormones. So, in addition to their many functions, stress hormones are stimulants that stimulate the body.
Yep. And that's why when the stress response is active, we feel stimulated and ready to go.
All revved up.
Yep.
So in addition to stimulation, stress hormones cause a number of other changes in the body, and they're all designed to enhance our ability to either fight or run. Yep. Now, stress hormones can cause changes such as an increase in our heart rate and our respiration, our senses to become hyper-alert, blood flow changes occur, there can be changes in how the brain functions, and a wide range of other changes, all geared to help the body when in danger.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Unfortunately, due to time and space, we're not going to go into all of the changes stress hormones bring about in this podcast. But if you're interested in learning the extent of these changes, Chapter 3 in the recovery support area of our website explains these in detail.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, we go to great lengths to explain all of this, just so we have a better understanding. Mm-hmm. But here are some key things to consider regarding how a stress response affects the body. When a stress response is activated, stress hormones cause changes in the body for a certain period of time. For example, if you're afraid just for a moment, the activation of a first stage stress response can cause changes that last for a few minutes or so.
So, Jim, that would be an example of, say, your friend jumped out from behind a wall and scared you.
Yep.
Right? Then you would have that immediate fight or flight response. But it would be only short because pretty quickly you would recognize, oh, that's my friend, right?
Yep. Once I realized there wasn't any danger, then the stress response shuts off and the body goes into its recovery mode. Yep, you bet. But if we're afraid for 3 minutes or more, a second stage stress response can cause changes that last up to 20 minutes or more.
Yeah. So like example might be, you come home from a day of shopping and, oh my gosh, the house is on fire.
Yep, yeah.
Right? So you're going to need some real sustained stress hormones to get through that event.
Absolutely, yeah. And as long as we feel threatened or that something is that we love is being threatened, the body's going to kick into that stress response. And yeah, you bet.
So a first stage stress response secretes stress hormones primarily made up of the hormone adrenaline and noradrenaline. Now, it's designed to give us an immediate boost of energy, and it takes the body, like we were saying, 1 to 2 minutes to either use it up or break it down.
Yeah.
And with the second stage stress response, this secretes hormones primarily made up of cortisol. Now, cortisol is a much more powerful and impacting hormone that has a long-lasting effect. And so it takes the body about 20 to 30 minutes to either use it up or break it down.
Yep.
So again, we aren't going to go into further detail about the differences between stage 1 and stage 2 stress responses, but we have detailed information about this in the recovery support area of our website if you're interested in following up further with that.
Yeah, you bet, yeah. Now, when the stress response is active, the physiological, psychological, and emotional changes cause sensations associated with those changes. I mean, it's unrealistic to think that the body's going to go through a major change and we're not going to feel anything. Of course we are. For example, because stress hormones cause the heart rate to increase, we might feel a shortness of breath and an elevated heart rate when the stress response is active.
And because stress hormones shunt blood around the body so that it can be used more appropriately for survival, we might also feel flushed, we might have a twinging sort of feeling in the stomach, or maybe even cold hands and feet.
Yeah, you bet. And because stress hormones are stimulants, we might also feel weak in the knees, which is a common reaction when a person is afraid or nervous. Might feel lightheaded, and we might have a trembling inside just due to the stimulation itself.
Right. Now, because stress hormones heighten our senses, we might also find lights too bright. We might find, sounds too loud, especially, the noise of little children can be hard on the nerves. And other sensations, they're all kind of hyperstimulated.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, the senses, they go on high alert, you bet. Now, the feelings associated with the stress response changes can last as long as the stress response is active. Important. They can last as long as the stress response is active. And that makes sense because as the body's bringing these changes about and keeping them sustained, we're going to feel the sensations associated with those changes. We call these feelings that are associated with the stress response changes sensations. We have to keep in mind that the degree of stress response changes is directly proportional to the degree of danger we believe we're in. For example, as the degree of threat increases, so does the amount of stress hormones secreted into the bloodstream increase, as well as the degree of changes the stress response brings about. So everything goes up.
So as long as you're afraid and experiencing stress responses, you can feel the sensations associated with the stress response changes.
Yep.
So when the stress response ends and the body has had sufficient time to recover, you can expect stress response sensations to end as well.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so this is an explanation as to why we can experience sensations when we are anxious, stressed, or afraid.
Yeah, you bet, yeah. And as we mentioned, stress responses cause changes in the body, which the body has to recover from once the stress response ends. When we experience infrequent stress responses, like every once in a while, the body can recover relatively quickly within a few minutes or so. But when the body experiences too frequent or dramatic stress responses, it can take the body a lot longer to recover before it returns to normal health. Now, if the body isn't given sufficient time to recover before experiencing another stress response, the body can remain in a state of semi-stress response readiness, which we call stress response hyperstimulation.
So it's really important to build in that rest time after a stressful period.
And if we don't, what the body does in response,
Now, this means that a stress response hyperstimulated body can experience persistent symptoms of stress even though we might not be anxious in that moment.
Yeah, you bet. It's a common comment we hear is, well, why am I experiencing symptoms yet I don't feel stressed? We hear that quite often.
Yeah, and I'll hear people say, I've been stressed for the last 3 months and I was fine all the way through the crisis. And now nothing's going on, but I'm really stimulated.
Yeah, you bet. And that's because the consequences of stress usually show up after the stress is over. And we're going to talk more about that in a later segment. But, for now, we have to keep in mind that when the body becomes overly stressed and stimulated, it can cause many of the organs, systems, and glands that are affected by the stress response to become overly stressed and overly worked, at which point they become symptomatic. And symptoms really in this case are just an indication that those systems, organs, and glands are overly stressed and are causing symptoms of being overly stressed. We call these types of symptoms of stress response hyperstimulation.
So anxiety sensations are the feelings associated with the active stress response changes, and symptoms are indications that the body is overly stressed and hasn't had sufficient time to recover from too frequent or dramatic stress responses.
That's correct. Yeah, you bet. Yeah.
Now, these sensations and symptoms can be mild when we are experiencing mild anxiety and stress, but boy, their intensity can dramatically increase as the body's level of stress increases. And those that suffer with intense symptoms and symptoms that are hanging around 24/7, well, they do so because their bodies are greatly hyperstimulated.
Yeah.
Now, as the body's hyperstimulation increases, so can the type, the number, the intensity, the frequency, and the duration of the sensations and symptoms increase.
Yeah, you bet. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're directly proportional, aren't they?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So a person can become very sick due to anxiety and stress response hyperstimulation. I mean, I felt horrible due to anxiety and the stress it caused me when I was struggling with my problematic anxiety. I mean, I experienced all of the symptoms we list at our website into great severity just because my body was so overly stressed. Now, the symptoms we list in the anxiety symptoms section of the public pages describes some of these symptoms, so you might want to check that out. Now, we don't have them all listed there and described there, but if you want the entire list, you can go to the Chapter 9 in the recovery support area of our website. We spent a great deal of time putting all of the symptom information together there with the causes and descriptions and what we can do to get rid of them and how many people experience them. So it's a very, very comprehensive symptom section there for sure, yeah.
It is, yes. Now, this is a brief overview of why the body experiences sensations and symptoms of stress due to behaving in an overly apprehensive manner. So again, for more detailed information, the recovery support area of our website explains this in much detail.
Yeah, you bet. So behaving in an overly apprehensive manner can really crank up the body and nervous system, and stress response hyperstimulation can make us feel very ill, no question about it. Now, a lot of people will mistake their sensations and symptoms and think they're medically caused, but they're actually caused by what the body does in response to being overly stressed. Very clear. We're going to elaborate on this in an upcoming episode, but for now, yes, behaving in an overly apprehensive manner can cause us to feel very poorly and cause great hardship due to how the stress of being overly anxious affects the body. So while our behaviors involve thinking, they have biological consequences, and those consequences can be dramatic.
Yeah, they sure can be. Yep. Now, the good news is that this is all reversible when we do the right work.
Yep.
Now, there's a bad news side, and that is that reversing this can take a lot longer than most people think.
Yep.
So again, we'll be talking more about this in an upcoming episode.
Yeah. Well, that wraps it up for today's podcast. We thank you again for joining us today.
We hope you found our conversation helpful, and we look forward to you joining us next time. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Until next time.